just thought I'd do a quick update because it was only a week ago. Normally we do these every other week, but due to technical issues, we've had more webinars this last month than we normally do. Update on what the FSA has been up to. No doubt, we've had quite a few emails asking us if we're part of the Institute for Outdoor Learning sort of campaign to try and get schools as we move more back out of lockdown to really take outdoor learning a lot more seriously as part and parcel of going back into school and more permanently as well. So we've sort of joined with the Institute for Outdoor Learning. I think Lou's going to put a link up for those that are interested in that. That's their campaign. The Council for Learning Outside the Classroom is involved with that and quite a few other outdoor learning organisations. So the FSA is sort of part and parcel of that. So that was just something. We are also talking about our own sort of campaign to get Forest School actually firmly in people's minds as we move back in as well. And we'll update you on that as we're working on that at the moment. So there's that. We've been mentioning, because of lockdown, the conference obviously in October is not happening. And we've been talking about the possibility of an online conference. So I don't know whether you all saw the poll. We're just exploring, because we felt autumn was too soon. So we're still exploring the possibility of an online conference, possibly next January and February. So there is a poll that's up there to answer, just to see what you'd feel about a weekend. So it's a bit of market research. If we did start organising one. So we're just testing the waters at the moment to see whether that's possible. We've had lots of lovely feedback on these webinars. So we started it last week, a bit of market research to look at the long-term future of these webinars, because they seem to have been received so well. We are looking at how we can carry these on long-term. So do answer all those questions. And while we're talking about COVID, for those that haven't been to one of these before, a couple of weeks ago we put, what was it, at the beginning of last week? God, time's gone so quick. Some new guidance up about COVID in response to the government announcing the easing of lockdown. So do have a look at the web link for that, which Lou's just put up in the chat room. And as part of that, we have produced a risk assessment, which members can get. Now, we are actually reviewing that risk assessment at the moment. So for members, this is just for members. So if you, hopefully by the end of the week, we're adding a bit more to the risk assessment, given the guidance that's come out recently and the intelligence that we've picked up as we've gone through COVID in this lockdown. So that risk assessment that went out right at the beginning, which is generic, and there's a lot of interpretation involved with this. There will be a new sort of risk assessment and guidance coming out fairly soon, so keep an eye out for that. And then finally, for those that weren't here last week, I think the week before we mentioned this, there is a new PowerPoint that we've put together on Forest School, and it's really comprehensive. We've already had some really good feedback from people on it. It's available to the public in YouTube form. Yeah, Lou's just put that up in the chat bar as well. So do take a copy of that. This will go in the notes that go out with this to you after. And the actual presentation members can get themselves as well. Now, with that, there are loads of really useful notes, which helps us fight our corner, really. Lots on research, the latest research into health and well-being and mental health and all the rest of it is included in that. So do look at that, because it is a useful advocacy tool for us as practitioners, as well as to sell Forest School, if you like, to anybody and everybody. So do have a look out for that. So that's my brief updates about the FSA. So do have a look at that poll, which is up for another 3 minutes or so. So Nick, before we introduce Caylin, really quickly, do you want to just remind us about some Zoom etiquette?
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who might not have been to Zoom before, the etiquette really for something like this is that we remain muted until such a time as the discussion is opened up. And then kind of as we move on through the night, I'll unmute you and we'll be going into breakout rooms. When you're put into breakout rooms, you'll have a control pop up for you to allow you to join a room. If you have technical problems, jump back to the main screen, or if you're in a room by yourself, click on leave breakout room, which will be in the bottom right hand side of your screen. It should be a little red or blue box. And if you click on that, you'll come to the main screen where I will be waiting to put you into another room, or you can just stay and have a chat with me if you want. Yeah, and then we are recording this evening, and the recording will be available to people that have attended or people that have registered. Yeah, so if you don't want to appear in person, then please turn off your camera by clicking the start video, so it's got a little red line through it. And I'm trying to think whether there's anything else, John. And that's down on the left-hand side of your screen at the bottom. And your mute button is also down there on the left-hand side, which you can click on so you can talk. But you won't be able to do it at the moment because you're not allowed, because I have the power. And there we go, John.
Good. I wasn't taking much notice. Did you mention the speaker view thing?
Oh, I didn't. So there's different
great.
views. In the top right-hand side of your screen, there's a little button, and depending where you are, it'll either have 9 white blocks, or it'll have something called speaker view. If you click on where it says speaker view, you'll be able to see Caylin when she's talking and nobody else. And if you want to look at the gallery view and see people's reactions, you can click on gallery view and see everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
So, I'd like to introduce Caylin. I don't know whether you want to unmute yourself, Caylin.
Sure. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for coming all the way from Ottawa. I don't know how you get here so quickly. I've known Caylin for many years, and she's become an international figure now as a result of this. I've always said, when I've been conducting forest school training, but also talking to other forest school practitioners, this is an essential for your book list, Forest School to the book, or going onto her blog, forestschool.com, which she's been running now for, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 5, almost 6 years?
About 4 or 5 years.
5 years, right. And it is a distillation of Caylin's forest school journey from training all the way up to now, and it's still continuing. And it is a real lesson in reflection. And Caylin said before on a number of forums, and said to me that before she came to the forest school training, that she'd just found writing hard and tedious as a child, as an adolescent, at school, even an adult, and never really reflected that deeply. So I'm going to kick this off with a question, really. So apart from this reflection having to be part of your forest school training, because it's in the forest, it's a requirement, the forest school qualification, I really wondered what else it was that really made you look inside yourself as a practitioner, because that's, I think, what we have to do. We often see reflection as looking at the kids and looking at what's happening, but it's more about us and what we do and how we are, for me. So I just wondered what sort of made you start looking at yourself as a practitioner, but also as a human, and start to articulate that and bare your soul to the world, which is literally what you've done. You've exposed yourself. You've exposed your vulnerability, for me, because if you dive into some of Caylin's reflections, she really is talking about her own inner self, her inner secret self. So I just wondered, what is it that made you write this so openly and clearly for this last 5 years, just to kick us off in terms of this reflection journey?
Yeah, thanks, John. Probably the hardest question I've ever been asked to start off anything like this.
We dive in.
Yeah, but a good question. And I first just want to say thank you to everybody who's here tonight, who's shown up. It's wonderful to be here with you all in, virtual companionship. And yeah, it's a really great question, John. And just for those maybe who don't know as much about me, or are new to this forest school, you haven't come across my work before, I am originally from the States but moved to the UK and lived there for about 5 years, and that's where I came across forest school. But I'd always been involved in outdoor and environmental education, and it was, like John said, the training that as part of the assignments was you needed to keep a learning journal. And I, as John's already mentioned, I hated writing. I just really, that was not something that I wanted to do. And I put it off for the first 6 months of the 9 months of the training, until finally I reached this stage where I was like, okay, I gotta start this assignment now, because I'm supposed to reflect on my my learning. And if I wait until the end, I'm not gonna have anything to reflect on, or like I won't be able to see my progress, or how I've changed throughout. So I better start this now. And in sort of to answer your question as well, John, as part of that, at the same time, I was also assisting a forest school program. And that particular program was with a group of kids who were part of a PRU, who had been excluded from mainstream school. And so, as well as doing my training, I was also in tandem having these experiences in a forest school program with a extremely wonderful but challenging group of kids. And I think that that's probably what sparked it for me, where it was the realization that I needed to dig deep to challenge my own assumptions of my, view of the world while working with these children, because I knew if I didn't, I would be creating a barrier to connection with them. So it was really this wanting to be able to connect with these children more deeply and needing to take a step back, and yeah, challenge those assumptions and sort of see myself and the world in a little bit of a different way. And it did a lot, and that's why I've kept going. Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, or not on the flip side, I guess along with that, the vulnerability piece is not, yeah, it does feel like my book is my diary. And there was a lot, there's been a process of me getting to this stage where it's out and available on Amazon. My diary is on Amazon for people to buy. And I think that a big piece of that I just want to mention is when I started writing, it was in a Word document saved in a secret folder on my computer. And I shared it with one person who I felt safe to share it with, who was my mentor and the person I was working directly with for a program. And it was having that person who was creating a psychological safety for me to bare my soul, and the non-judgment that came with me sharing it was what helped me to feel like, okay, I can share this a little more. And then it was sending it to you, John, and you having that non-judgment and saying, hey, I think you should share this more widely. So I think I just want to highlight that, of having a community of people who create a safe, space psychologically, emotionally, for you to be able to share is really important.
Yeah, I agree entirely. So, so my next question is really, how has things changed for you, and in terms of where you're at now, in terms of looking at reflection and what that means for you, both internally for you as a practitioner, but also externally for working with the youngsters that you do work with in forest school. So what sort of processes are you going through and all the rest of it at this point, seeing as that's the meat of the seminar?
Do you want me to go into what I what I prepared? Is that where this is going?
Yeah,
okay.
That's where this is going. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. So I've kind of been, just telling my stories. I consider my blog and the book as sharing my stories, but in true forest schooled fashion. If you've been following me or know a little bit about me, I love to link my experiences to other people's ideas and thoughts and theories and research and all of that. So that's what a lot of my writing does, is talking about my experiences, but then linking it to other ideas that are out in the world. And so I've done that in connection with reflection. So reflecting on reflection. And so I have a few slides just to share with you all tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and start there. I'm hoping, is that working, John?
Yep. you might want to just make it into, that's it.
Yeah, be there?
Great. Yeah, we're there.
Okay. Yeah, so in thinking about the process of reflection and how it fits in with, you know, our learning, our professional learning, but also personal learning, I've also been picking up little pieces from works and readings and resources over the years of other people who talk about the process of learning and the importance of reflection within it. And I've kind of, my brain works in patterns where I see overlaps and connections between things. And so just more recently, I've been in this process of sort of thinking about these different models and I guess theories that I've come across and seeing a real link between them all. So I've just put a list up of ones that I've been exposed to that talk about learning as a cycle. So a process where you're, you know, working through different stages, if you will, and then you end up and where kind of where you started in a sense, and then start that cycle again. I like to think of it more as a spiral because you're not necessarily getting back to the same place, but you're still moving in a circular motion. So these are just a handful of learning models that I've come across that refer to reflection. Some people may have heard of Kolb, that's, you know, been around for decades. And then McCarthy's format, experiential learning cycle. There's a book that refers to those two and kind of synthesizes them in its own way called Coming Home, which is by Cheryl Charles, who actually was the co-founder of the Children in Nature Network in the North America. And then some, I'm sure I've heard of Joseph Cornell, who talks about flow learning. And then there may be some that also have heard of Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature. John Young is the most prominent person known to be associated with that work. And it talks about the natural cycle. And then more recently, I've come across a book called Natural Curiosity, which comes from Canada, actually, in Ontario, where I'm based. And it's around the framework of inquiry-based learning, but it also puts next to the like Western perspectives and Indigenous perspective on learning and how where there's overlap and where there's not, and just sort of presenting those perspectives alongside each other. So I've taken from all of those and sort of summarized, this is my version of a learning cycle. And before I show you that, there was an exercise that was in the book Coming Home by Cheryl Charles and Bob Samples that just sparked something in me. And so I've tweaked it for our sort of circumstances and maybe interests, and wanted to just throw it out to everybody to see if it resonated with you. So in that book, it talked about 4 different sort of aspects of learning. And these will connect to the cycle, but I'm going to show that a bit later. And I'm putting it in reference to learning more about willow weaving. So this exercise, you can see that each one is numbered. That's not a hierarchy or anything like that. It's more of just reading this like a clock, like a circular, think of it like the face of a clock. And just think about if you have a preference, like if you wanted to learn about weaving willow, and there's lots of different ways to learn more about weaving willow. And I've put just 4, this is oversimplified, but I've just put 4 different potential options for learning. And I'm wondering if going through them, if you find yourself drawn to one in particular, maybe one that you think, yeah, I would definitely want to do that. And one where you're like, nah, I'm not interested. So I'll just give a minute, I'll read through them and just have a think of whether, one, ask a number of willow weavers why they started weaving and why they care about continuing the tradition. Draft or tell a story about why people care about weaving. That's one way. Another way is to research and conduct an analysis of the different types of weaving methods that exist, document and report the results. The third one is weave a willow basket yourself to understand and demonstrate one way it can be done and how a basket can be useful. And then the last one is create a new way to work with willow, stretching the edges of people's thinking about how the craft can be integrated in your community. So just again, the first one is going out into community and asking a number of people about why they care and coming up with a story to either write down or tell about why people care about weaving. The second one is doing some research and analysis of all the different types of weaving methods and documenting and reporting that. Another one is to actively go and weave a basket and try it and show an example of that. And then the fourth one is to create a different way, create a whole new way, innovate, to stretch the edges of how people think about the craft. So I think because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not sure I can see the comments. But if you felt like you wanted to share in the comments a number, like whether you were resonating more with 1 or with 3, 4, 2, with the group, you're welcome to put that in the comments. I wish I could see that, but I can't figure out a way to do that on my screen. So maybe John, if you're able to see and anything comes up that seems relevant to highlight.
Yeah. So far, many more 4s and 3s than 1s and 2s. The odd one, and I'm still looking for a 2. Oh, there's a 2. Oh, there's a 1, 3, 4, and 2 there.
Yeah.
There's 1, 2. More 3s, many more 3s. 1, bit of 1, bit of 1. 4s, 4 and a 2. 4, 4, 4. 1 and 4. 4, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3. You get the gist.
Yeah,
3 and 4.
Awesome.
1,
Thank
3,
you all
and 4.
for participating in that.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've ever done this exercise by Zoom call.
And then somebody's put lemon, which I quite like. That's Shane. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, so I think the great thing about this part is it sort of highlights that we all have different preferences for the ways that we go about learning. It doesn't mean that I want to highlight the difference between learning preferences and learning styles, because there is sort of this myth that there's a lot of work that's debunked. Their learning styles don't necessarily exist, but we do have preferences. We all have these capacities for learning in this way, but we tend to attach ourselves to a preference. And also sometimes, speaking for myself, forget that other people might have a different preference. I make an assumption like, oh, well, everybody will want to do it this way. And if you're curious about what number I would choose, it's number 4. And yeah, so I think it just emphasizes that we all sort of attach ourselves to different preferences. So I'm going to show you the next one where I've mapped out my interpretation of the learning cycle and how that fits with this exercise and what we've just talked about. So in the book Coming Home, they sort of talked about 4 different parts of the cycle, and they used terms that were sort of vocational. And me being who I am, I wanted to put a nature lens on that. So to consider, the teachers that we have in the natural world and what they show us. And so this is my interpretation of this, like a revision of it through my eyes, using the natural world as the inspiration. So thinking about the learning cycle in these terms, in the upper right-hand corner, again, looking at it like the face of a clock, I've got the mushroom and the rabbit or the hare that's under the ground. And that's really thinking about like seeking depth. So finding that personal meaning and that relevance. So that spark, that inner spark to ourselves, and where it connects to our own lives. And that's why we find it important to want to learn about it. So that, that can come first. And then number 2, the opportunity, I've put the owl and that's the bough of a pine tree as the watching and the waiting. So the observing and the considering. So then you have time to maybe consider, what have other people thought about this idea? And if we're going back to the willow, like what's already been done in the past? What can I learn from just watching or observing or seeing what other people have, where they've come from? And then the third one, I've got the bee and a honeysuckle as the building and the weaving. So then you're moving the theory to the practice. And this is where you're actually getting into doing something. You're building something, or you're weaving something, in this case with willow. And then the fourth one, you can then stretch the edges and find new ways of being in the world. You're growing and you're evolving. And this is a cycle. So once you've had that experience, you would then go back to, okay, what does that experience mean to me? And again, you're seeking that depth, that personal meaning and that relevance, and then you go through again. And so you're building, like I mentioned, the spiral, where you're building and building and growing and evolving as you go. So I hope this is making sense. I know it's a little bit sort of philosophical, but what is interesting about this is if you look at the right side, the number 1 and the number 2, the depth seeking and the watching and sorry, I can't see, the watching and the waiting or the observing, those are the reflective pieces. On the left side, those are the active pieces. And I found in my life, I was drawn to the active stuff. I was like, I just want to be doing stuff. I just want to try it. I don't want to research. I don't want to write a research paper about it. I want to just go and do it and experience it. And I was neglecting the reflective part of myself where, stopping to think about it a little more. And there's a quote in the same book that I've sort of expanded upon, Coming Home, that really resonated with me. That says, taking action has more popular appeal in a society that emphasizes productivity and results. It indicates that something is getting done. Moving too quickly to action can mean we did so without enough consideration of the consequences of those actions. On the other hand, too much reflection can mean immobility. So that just really got me thinking about why am I so drawn to action? There's a million answers within that, and for each of us that's personal, but I think it is worth reflecting on the expectation in our society that we need to be productive. We need to be producing things, and we need to be working. And just for me, I'm questioning that. I'm questioning that. And I'm also taking appreciation in the stopping and the thinking. And also the language that we used to frame this webinar was creating balance in our professional learning process, because it's not about rejecting one for the other. It's about finding the balance. And for me, I was taking too much action and not enough reflection. And so the past 4 or 5 years of me writing Forest Gold has given me an opportunity to try to figure out that balance a little more. And I know that if I spend too much time in reflection, if I spend a whole day on a computer researching and reading and filling my brain with ideas, and I can sometimes feel like I'm stuck. What do I do with that? And that immobility can come in. On the other hand, if I'm just doing stuff and moving and moving and moving and moving, I'm missing things. I'm not taking a chance to just slow down and wonder, what am I not seeing because I'm moving so fast? And I sort of think of the analogy of being in a car. I'm sure people can relate, but I've definitely been in car rides with people where you're driving on a highway or freeway and somebody goes, oh, did you see that? Whatever it might be out the window. No, I missed it. I didn't see it. And it's gone. Oh, never mind, it's gone. And it's because the car is moving too fast that you just miss it and you don't see it. It doesn't mean that stuff isn't there. It's out there. You're just not able to look at it and understand it and connect with it. So thinking about stopping the car, getting out and seeing what is actually there that you're missing. So yeah, I hope this sort of makes sense. One element that I wanted to just sort of wrap up at least this part of the webinar with was considering reflection as a form of vulnerability. And John's already initiated that conversation, and I've expressed how, yeah, it does feel like, the blog that I've put out into the world is showing my diary of my learning process. And I wouldn't say that it feels good all the time at all. And it's been really, really tough and hard. And if anybody's been following me along for the years that I've been doing it, I only revealed who I was, as a face, as an image. I put a picture up on the website this February. I was sort of anonymous, just writing. It was really nice to be behind the screen and just writing and sharing it, but people don't really know who I am for years and years and years. And it's only just recently that I've been like, yeah, okay, this is me. I'm ready to be here. And some of you may already be familiar with Brené Brown's work, but Brené Brown is a researcher based in the States who actually researches vulnerability. And I'm just putting this quote up because I think it's something I have to remind myself of a lot. I think it's just been a significant thing for me, where vulnerability is the gooey center of the hard emotions that we work full-time to avoid feeling, much less discussing. Emotions like fear, shame, grief, disappointment, sadness. And if anybody had been with me, there's a couple friends who maybe didn't make it to this webinar tonight, but if they do watch it, they would be like, yeah, we were there. Because in the process of publishing my book, I felt fear, I felt shame, I felt grief, disappointment, sadness. There was a point where I thought, I'm not doing this. I can't put this out there. I was too afraid. But Brené Brown, her work has shown or revealed to people that vulnerability isn't just the center of hard emotions, it's the core of all emotions. To feel is to be vulnerable. So you have to have that vulnerability and those, those difficult emotions to also feel the emotions like joy, love, belonging. So that's just, yeah, I'm putting that one out there as a little bit of a reflective piece to consider about that feeling of vulnerable. and how we cope with it. So that is the end of that. So I can try to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Here we go.
Great, thanks. Before you pose some questions to us, I've just got one little question, and you can answer it now or leave it till later. I just wonder what the role of vulnerability is, because I see it as core in our reflective practice, totally core. If we aren't really thinking about how we feel and understand the way we relate to learners, not how they relate to us or relate to each other, then we are missing 80% of reflection for me. So I just wondered where you see vulnerability comes in terms of that reflective process in those 4 areas, from the sort of, if you like, from the thinking and the right the way through to the weaving and the creating.
I think it's embedded in each of those. And I think, yeah, it's more of a, I guess, just speaking for me, a frame of mind where I notice when I feel fear or shame, and I acknowledge it and then say, I'm going to just sit with it, and I'm not going to, and I'm not perfect at this, but sometimes we can get defensive. And even with children, you know, as something's happening, we can get defensive. And especially, I think there's a presumption that, you know, the adults have to be right. So sometimes, yeah, feeling like you can't show your vulnerability to children because you have to be the one that's in charge. And I do try to show within reason. I don't want to send children into panic if there's something happening, but within reason, I do show vulnerability in that. And so I try to hold it with me wherever I go. And it's become easier over the years. For me, I've actually had conversations with people more recently who have said, like, thank you for being vulnerable. I imagine that must have been really hard for you. And I've been like, what? Was I being vulnerable? Because for me, it didn't feel as much so anymore. So I don't know if that answers the question, John. But
Yeah, no, that's good. That sort of, it's just a hint of, I guess it's I think it's such a core thing of us. It's, that we bury, and just like in the grief seminar, a webinar last week, the reason depression is there is grief that's been buried, and we have to uncover it. It's the same with children. It's just exactly the same. It's the same for everybody. And that's where our edge is, and that's where learning happens for me. So I know you've got some questions to follow on from all that to pose to people before they go into their breakout rooms. Yeah,
and I also just want to acknowledge that this is, you know, I've just done like a whirlwind about a really deep topic that, you know, I've written a book about reflection as well, which took months. And so I just want to acknowledge that, you know, there's a lot in this, and it's also deeply personal, and it's not like someone, you know, here's me, Caylin, saying, all right, everybody be vulnerable. Like, it's not as simple as that at all. So I just want to acknowledge that, and that it's a process, and it's different for each of us as individuals. So take what you need from this, and maybe sit with it and do more down the line if you want to. But I just wanted to pose a few questions for us tonight as we do our breakout rooms to think about. The first question is, what can reflection look like? Because I know for me, I didn't really understand what reflection was. Like, how do you do it? And there's a variety. We're a diverse group with diverse preferences and histories and backgrounds and, you know, all of that. So just that question of, what do you think reflection could look like? And then another one I wanted to pose was, what barriers might we face in practicing reflection? Because I think I know for me, sometimes I don't, because of things that are happening in my life, maybe decisions that I make or external circumstances, and it creates a barrier that makes reflection challenging. So I also want to acknowledge that, and for us to consider, what are the barriers that might prevent us from doing it, whether that's internal or external. And then can we think of, even if it's just one idea that could help us to overcome those barriers, you know, or one barrier to integrate reflection into our practice. So yeah, those are the three questions. What can reflection look like? What barriers might we face in practicing reflection? And what could help us overcome those barriers and integrate reflection into our practice?
Okay, great. So we're going to send you into breakout rooms with about 4 or 5 people in each to just contemplate those over the next between 15 and 20 minutes. And then Nick will give you a heads up when you're in your breakout room. So it's up to you to self-organize. You may want to quickly introduce each other and then work way. You might not get through all the questions, that's fine. You may have your other questions that come up, but those are the ones to stimulate this conversation about reflection. And then we'll all come back together for a couple of minutes at the end of that, and then move to the last little bit of this. Okay, and could somebody in each room take some notes? Maybe you might have do them in a Word document so that we can actually, because we won't see each other rooms and it's too short a piece to have a big plenary. So if each person in each room, if you can have one person take some notes and then just we'll post those up onto the Zoom group chat at the end, and they'll go into the notes that you'll all get afterwards. Okay, and we'll take a little bit of feedback at the end, but not a whole lot. It's just the whole format. We'd be here for a couple of hours if we were to do a proper plenary. So is that okay? So Nick, and then you'll need to unmute yourselves when you get into your breakout rooms.
I'm just doing a little bit of jiggling round. Just bear with me a second. One more person to move. There we go. Okay. Ready to go. If you do have a problem, then click leave breakout rooms, and you'll come back to me and I can sort you out from here. Okay, everybody, enjoy.
So the common thing that seems to have come, it came up in our group, and it's come up in a couple of these, Caylin, is time. How do we find the time and space to do this properly? In terms of what reflect, that sort of seems to be one of the common things, and I'm going to put that to you.
Yeah, that came up in our group too.
Yeah.
Yeah, as like a main thing, and it being necessary for reflection and also the barrier. And I can summarize a little bit of our conversation, add a few more of my thoughts, but essentially it's about, like, some of us are attracted to forest school because it provides the time or, promotes the time, at least within the philosophy, where even within someone reflecting that, even within a session, you sort of have time to step back and reflect about how you're feeling, because the kids, you're observing, or you're not having to be at the front dictating what's happening and, in charge all the time. So that's one piece. But I also think that there's an element of some of the things that we talked about was planning less, letting go. Letting go was something that stood out to me, of the feeling like we need to control what's happening at all times, and to just allow ourselves to do less. And for me, something that I'm still learning is setting boundaries. Even if for me, what's been the hardest thing is being in a culture, and particularly in workplaces, that don't acknowledge the need for reflection or time to process. And me knowing that I need it, and not feeling like I can advocate for it because it's too scary, or, I don't want to feel like I'm not fitting in, or everybody else seems to be doing this rush around thing, so I need to conform and do it too. And what I'm learning to do is to say, no, I need time, and set a boundary. And one thing that we discussed is really helpful to be able to advocate for our own needs is to have a community of people that support us in that, so that you don't feel like you're the only one, where it feels validating to have a community of people who are saying, like, yeah, it is acceptable to need time for yourself, and to reflect. So those are a couple of highlights for me, I guess.
So a couple of other things that have come up was trying to make this whole reflection process child-led. So I have a question for you. Where's the room for the adult? Because this is about a community reflection. And absolutely, the child needs a huge stake in this. So it's how do you incorporate in a child-led reflection process that's probably more spontaneous rather than the common thing that's been mentioned up here. Okay, who had something they loved today and who had something they hated today, sort of round at the end of a session, which for me is not taking reflection seriously because it's part and parcel of the whole process. So I just wonder what your thoughts on that were. If you are going truly child-led rather than child-centered, that the two are different. Where's the role of the adult in all of that for a school leader?
Can you just say the question one more time to make sure I'm understanding it?
So if you're going to make the reflection process child-led.
For the child?
The child's leading the reflection process, right? As opposed to child-centered, then the two are different, right? So the child-led's been said here. My question to you is, where's the role for the adult in that, given that Forest School is very I would say child-centered and community-based. Child-led is a different thing. So where's the role of the adult in all of that?
That's a really big question, John.
I know, sorry.
No, but I think listening.
Mm-hmm.
That's and there's more to it, and you know, with more time and depth, we could dig deeper. But and not just listening like yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But really listening, you know, trying to understand what is going on in that child's world, not through your eyes, but through theirs. And I think that comes down to empathy. You know, yeah. the skill of empathy. So that's my mini summary of that huge question. Okay.
Great. Well, thanks for that. I just wanted to say what Basia was saying here, because this chimes exactly with how I feel about reflection. Just to round this bit off before we dive into the two rooms and finish this off. If you don't mind, Basia, I was just going to read this out. So Basia works both in a school and as a freelancer, and reflection is radically different, which you find often. I had the same experience. I find it more effective as a freelancer as it's fully embedded in my practice. It's something that happens all the time. It's not just a bolt on at the end. I'm assuming that's what you mean from that. Across all areas connected to running Forest School. However, sometimes I feel that in a school context, only lip service is paid to it and it becomes a box ticking exercise because we are in this outcome-based education system. That I'm just adding that to that. It's really hard, it's tough. That's coming from Ofsted all the way down. I think even with, my worry is mental health and well-being will become a tick box system if we're not careful. And it becomes tick boxing, namely pupil voice, which generally happens once a term. Children are the center of the learning. It needs to be happening consistently and embedded into all our Forest School sessions all the way through the session. I'm just adding that bit on the end. So I'll just leave you with that. So just for this bit, because for those who, it's now just past 9, it's almost 9:05. Can I say, because you can leave now, this is the formal bit, or you can stay on for an extra chat with Caylin or come into the community sharing room with me. Can I just say a huge thanks to Caylin for cramming in this huge topic in such a short time. And I think it's been a really productive thing. And hopefully it's just moved us on in terms of our thinking and more thinking to be done, because it's a lifetime process, this. So thanks so much, Caylin, doing that.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm just quickly, I've written a guide a while ago about reflection and integrating it more within, like, for children. So I'm just going to put in a link to access. There's a free PDF. I'm going to put that in the chat right now if anybody wants access to that.
Great. And also, if you want to know, there are Caylin's got some other reflection packs as well, which you do pay for, but it's peanuts, that are on our website. But this one is free. So thank you for that. For those who want to stay on with Caylin, then we're going to go, you'll stay here in the main room. Those who want to come to me for a bit of community sharing in the other room, you can. Those who wish to leave because the formal bits sort of finished now, then do. thank you for coming, everybody. And those who are staying on, we'll all get together at the end at sort of 9:30 just for a final wrap up. Thank you so much. And you will get the notes plus all the links and the copy of the slides and stuff along with the recording either tomorrow or Friday. Okay, so without much further ado, Nick, are you going to...
I'm going to set up these breakout rooms. Now, the way this has worked or not worked in the past is that when I click the button, everybody gets cascaded into one big breakout room, which is where John is going to wait. Everybody else who wants to come back and speak to Caylin will need to come back into the main room. So they'll need to leave the breakout room and come back. For some reason, Zoom won't let me give you an option. So come back into the main room if you want to have a chat with Caylin, and stay in the breakout room if you want to stay with John and his community gab. Righty ho. Opening rooms now.
Cool. Well, there's a few people trickling in still. Thanks for coming back, everyone. Yeah, I guess this is just an opportunity. I have nothing planned, so it's just an opportunity if you have questions or your thoughts that you want to add for us to just continue on this topic. So, yeah, I don't know if Nick, do you facilitate with, or do people just unmute themselves?
Well, well, usually it's a free for all, but we tend to get people going because it can be a bit unnerving. Oh, apparently people are trying to, but I haven't unmuted them. They should be able to unmute themselves. There you go. You're all unmuted. I was just hogging the limelight, sorry. I wanted to ask a question, and I was dying to all the way through, was what is the most rewarding aspect of you kind of grasping and coming to terms with reflection after all the trouble and heartache you've done putting the blog together and everything?
Sharing it. The most rewarding part is sharing it with other people. The hardest part is sharing it too, but it has come to be the most rewarding, and there's gratitude in me for all of you, you know, who have created that safe place for me to be able to share it. But yeah, not having to keep it locked away inside. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's still some that are having trouble unmuting. Sam.
Yeah, somebody's put that down. It's telling me that everybody is unmuted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts or questions from anyone? Brave enough to be vulnerable?
One thing that came up for us, Caylin, in our room was the idea of sort of spontaneous reflection. So we talked a lot about the fact that often reflection is something that you do in the last 5 minutes of a session, or you do in the last, once the children have gone, and it's something that's quite, sort of built into the session. And, you ask the children that they've enjoyed or whatever, or, what's the best thing you've done today? And it can be quite forced and it can be quite unnatural. And I think some children either don't want to speak or they don't feel able to, or you haven't facilitated that process enough to enable them to reflect effectively on what's happened. And so we talked about the idea of sort of capturing those moments of spontaneous reflection when you're walking to a site with a child and you happen to have a conversation, or, you bump into someone and you happen to have a chat, much more of a natural kind of process and a natural approach to reflection. And I wonder how that fits with your views, because we all use sort of techniques and tools and ideas to reflect, but sometimes the best reflection, this honest reflection, comes from when you don't mean to be reflecting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that that is such a valid form of reflection, and for us to actively acknowledge that it's happening. You don't have to verbally say like, okay, I'm reflecting now, but just to acknowledge like, yeah, I'm taking a moment to do that, and how does that feel? So that we become more comfortable with it as part of our process. And I totally agree that when it's natural, that's when a lot can come out. Yeah, and I think that just one thought that's coming to mind for me right now that I've been processing and learning with, particularly when working with kids, but this is also with adults, is sometimes we use questions to promote reflection. And as I'm learning about Indigenous perspectives, particularly now in Canada, thinking about how you're questioning. I just put up a more recent blog post about this, and rather than, because questions can create vulnerability, and if the person's not ready for that, that can be really tough and alarming, and shut down. So what I'm trying to work with is this idea of owning my own questions. So rather than asking a direct question, just making a statement, I'm wondering, blah, 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 blah. You know, I'm wondering how it feels to do this, or I'm wondering, blah, 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 blah. And just putting it as a statement. There's not an obligation to respond, but it can prompt that reflection. And if the person's ready to share, then they can. And it's also a point of reflection for yourself because you're acknowledging what you're curious about.
That comes out in a lot of attachment therapy. The way of dealing with attachment is sort of role modeling, but also it's that open statements that incite a little bit more sharing.
Yeah, it's a bit like the kind of counselling, you know, sort of life coaching thing, isn't it? Repeating what someone's just said back to them, but then repeating it in a different way. So you're not answering the question, you're not asking another question, you're just affirming what they've said and allowing them the space to then continue to reflect themselves, I suppose.
There's a really good book, I can't remember who it is by, but I can find it and put it in the chat with the notes, called Talk Less Teaching. So it's obviously written for teachers, but there are strategies in there, particularly with questioning. There's things called keepy uppy questions, where basically you're encouraging, and it does take a lot of time to get the children to be able to react to it. You're not allowed to answer a question directly unless you can link it with another question to another person. So there's a very much, what's got it? Isabella Wallace, possibly. I'll have a look. But it's really useful in terms of the strategies of trying to encourage that idea of sharing and reflection and children listening to others as well, which obviously sometimes can be a bit difficult, where they're not allowed to then just change the subject. They've got to then own or make sure that they're showing that they have understood, they've heard, they've listened to what that other person says by adding a layer of a comment on to, you know, I agree with what so-and-so has said. And also, and in terms of whole group reflection, I found that sort of works quite nicely. Otherwise you get them just completely shutting off until it's their turn to reflect.
Yeah, and then you say, there's a brief comment and that's gone, and usually the thing that the last kid just said before them, don't they? Whatever. Yeah.
I enjoyed everything.
Nice. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's also like our conversation, this always or can tend to happen, but we go to like, okay, how can we create reflection for the learners? And it's like we've turned to that again here. So I'm going to like redirect us a little bit, and maybe do people have questions or thoughts about our own personal reflections, you know, how we do that, whether the kids are there or not, you know, within our own practice. Are there questions or thoughts around that?
I know I really value the 10 minutes before a session and the half an hour afterwards. That tended to be all I got, but those 10 minutes beforehand where the group's not arrived yet and you've expected them 5 minutes ago, but they're not there yet, and you've just got those 10 minutes to spend in the woods just listening to everything and just being there for yourself in those 10 minutes and just putting things together and kind of stabilizing, ready for the onslaught, as it were. And then also that kind of come down after a session if it's been really, really energetic and really, you know, kind of really an amazing session, and you kind of come out of it and it's like, you know, when you watch a cartoon and the cartoon characters run out of the screen, out of the film, and you kind of like you've been going hell for leather, keeping it, you know, kind of watching everything and keeping an eye on everything, and then all of a sudden at the end of it, you just kind of like woof. And it takes a moment to kind of bring yourself back down again to a level where you can ground and be there and think about what's actually gone on. Do you find that you need that space, Caylin, or?
I can definitely relate to being grateful for that. Like, I was imagining the forests that I've worked in as you were describing that, Nick, and like that feeling just before they show up, and relating to that. And I think that you use a word that I use a lot, ground, like finding that place to ground yourself. Yeah, where can we find that? Where can we find that in our worlds, in our lives, in our routines, where we can feel grounded? Because that is the place where, you know, that settling can happen. And yeah, the 10 minutes before a session, absolutely. And I always was grateful for the probably about half an hour after the session to just chat with my colleagues, to just talk about because each of us would have had different experiences. Would have been on, you know, completely opposite ends of the forest we were in, potentially. So that was always such a really valuable aspect of it for me. Yeah.
And that time before as well, it gives you time to leave any baggage that you've brought with you in the morning as well. So whatever's gone on at home or stresses that you've had trying to get out of your own house to get to work and your own kids, just being able to get there a little bit early, deliberately early, to leave your own baggage at the forest school gate and have a time to just kind of empty your own mind, ready to be more receptive to the children, I find. And then, of course, maybe a teacher comes and wants to talk to you and you're like, oh, that was my 10 minutes of my breakout time. But it's just the way it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I love that, noticing what you're bringing with you to it, because that's also really important in terms of our interactions with the people that we're working with, is knowing what are we coming in with, and creating a place and a space for us to be able to acknowledge that.
I find to the children.
Yeah.
I'm more able to properly listen to them if I've left my baggage at the gate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Something I'm really looking forward to is actually now having smaller groups, because normally we work with, you know, classes like many people of 30 children. So often the reflection time is quite difficult. And, you know, I love the fact that, it's okay just, you know, to have the spontaneous reflection. I think I've always felt, oh gosh, I've got to, you know, fit a reflection period in towards the end of the session. But actually to have smaller groups and be able to, therefore, you know, it's hard to notice, you know, 30 children during a session, you know, and to sort of pick up on so many things. Whereas having 15 children is going to be, you know, proper forest school, isn't it? So that would be lovely, you know, now that the smaller groups are going to be coming out.
Yeah, I think the community that you're with really makes a difference. And I think maybe that part of that, like I was mentioning before, is that, we tend to feel like we can be more vulnerable in smaller groups. You know, when there's less people, less eyes on us, or you know, fewer people in our company. But I mean, that's a personal thing, and I'm speaking for myself here. But when there's fewer people around, I tend to feel like I can share more. Yeah. Anyone else? Thoughts, questions?
In our breakout room, we were talking a little bit about what you do after the session, and what you were saying there, Caylin. You know, you may have a colleague that you kind of debrief with a little bit, but also the importance, well, for me anyway, I just get home and just write on my laptop anything that I can remember about the session, that, you know, be that what we cooked on the fire, the dog walkers that came through, the conversations that happened, who fell out with who, just whatever I can remember about the session, because I just never know in however many weeks' time how significant what happened today, or which bit of what happened today is going to be ultimately significant for that child. If I haven't put that very well at all. But for example, I can remember reading through once, so quite often, you know, just before a session, read through back what had happened in the previous week or two, and just was reflecting that a little boy who had, like in weeks 1, 2 and 3, say, had been spitting a lot at other children, and actually that behaviour had just disappeared. And had I not written that down, it's just one of those things that I wouldn't have remembered, that he had once done that and now he wasn't doing it anymore. And just little things like that just enable you to reflect. It's just stuff that is so easily forgotten anyway by my brain, if I don't get it down somehow.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's where my blog post kind of came from too, because I was having these sessions with children that were really, really challenging me. And I would just come home and be like, I don't really know what to do with that. And I also don't want to forget it. So I just started sharing my stories, just writing down what had happened. And what do they call that when you're the flow? Like, there's a word for it. If anybody knows it, shout it out. But where you just allow yourself to write whatever comes to mind.
Free writing.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Writing maybe, I don't know. But anyway, yeah. And I think that we don't have to write everything down. I also want to emphasize that. But I know for me, having a record, like you were just saying, Fru, you can see change and reflect on change, and that can have a profound impact. Just to see, like, oh, even like for my book, that was, my reflections weekly for however many years. And then I compiled it into a book. And so I had to reread everything and organize it. And there were things where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was me then. So you'll find footnotes as I explain. I'm a little bit different now. This is what I thought then. But if I hadn't have written it down, I wouldn't even be aware of the growth that was happening.
It was also interesting, particularly about that boy that was spitting. When I went back to the woods that day, I said, I was just reading through what I'd written up, and just realised he hasn't actually been spitting, has he? And over the last couple of weeks, and the teacher, her face just lit up, and she said, no, he hasn't. I hadn't. It was just a behaviour that had gone, and she also hadn't actually kind of marked that was something that was no longer happening, which I suppose just helps me realise it's not just my own brain that wouldn't necessarily have remembered it, but
yeah.
It gives you kind of an opportunity for a hindsight mind to really look at things again.
Absolutely.
Which is really, really valuable. That it's not just the immediate reflection, it's the reflection on the reflection on the reflection on the reflection.
Completely, because what I write down in week 2 has a completely different colour when I'm looking back at it from week 10 or week 12.
Yeah. And I also find I'm not ready to reflect on certain things until weeks, months, years later. And I take notes. I just create, even if it's just a topic where I'm like, oh, I want to think about this more later, but I'm not ready right now. And then I'll come back to it. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And for me, the notes is just what helps to prompt me to come back to it. Not everybody needs that method, but there's just, you don't have to do it all right now. Like, okay, something just happened and I'm going to sit down and reflect. Sometimes it's like, okay, got to sit on that for a little bit and become who I'm going to be in 2 months' time, and then I'll reflect on it.
It's interesting when you get people that come back to you after many, many, many years. So I've got people that I taught in forest schools coming back to me, or coming back to me now, bumping into me with their own kids. And reflecting on their time at forest school with me, and it's really valuable to see what they felt at that moment in time, or through their adult eyes, how they felt or saw at that time. We're running out of time, and I'm going to have to close the breakout rooms. But I'm loving this, and I don't want to do it, so I'm just reflecting.
Don't do it, Nick. Don't do it.
Sorry, folks.
Well, thank you all for joining me for this.
Thank you very much, Caylin. Thank you. We've got about 20 seconds.
Do you want to have a quick comment question?
Yeah. So I'll try and find a really, really tricky question for you. There we go. They're on their way back now.
I love seeing the variety of backgrounds of where people are, imagining all our little lives. spread out all over the place.
Yeah.
Sam, you look like you're in a car.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to call that one out.
Great. So before we depart, I just thought, has anybody got just one question they would like to ask of Caylin? Just, you can put your hand up, because there's, how many of us are left? There's 36 of us. So, or you can type something into the chat room.
You can put your hand up by using the reactions key at the bottom of the screen.
Key, or you can physically put your hand up.
The little smiley face with a plus.
Right. 28. Okay. I've got one. Doesn't seem. Oh, as Becky. So Becky's put something up here, which is quite good. Just noticed it. Maybe a good thing to leave people with, I've just put moving forward, should be reflect on why we became a forest school leader. This has given me a great opportunity to reflect on my life, particularly my childhood, and why I love the outdoors and forest schools. So maybe we'll just leave you with that, because we've got 1 minute to go. I'm not going to leave a question for, why did you become a forest school leader? Think about it. You'll think of an answer, then think about it again and keep asking you that question. It's almost, the key is in the question. And that's part of being vulnerable, I think. It's really keep digging deeper with the question. So once you've answered it, think about the answer and get somebody else to say, and what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? We have to keep digging. We have to ask the questions. And I feel I've broken through when I'm working with learners, particularly older learners, when they keep asking the question. It's that inquiring mind that's key. So, and if you've got your own reflective journal, I just recommend, again, if you've not seen this or been on the forestschool.com website, do have a look at it. Caylin's book, Forest School, the book. And can I say a deep, deep thank you from the bottom of my heart to you, Caylin, for stimulating some really good discussions tonight and thoughts, and hopefully people will reflect on this reflection session. I think I might leave you. I read this poem in our little sharing group, but I thought I'd read it again because it's always good to hear it twice, to let it land, from David White, which says a lot about reflection for me, but also about vulnerability. So David White, he's an Irish, Yorkshire mix of the both poet who lives in California. For me, one of the best nature poets around, almost as good as Mary Oliver, but so this is called Tillico Lake, and it was stimulated by a lake, and it made me think about my middle child when she was 5, staring into our garden pot.
Uh-oh.
Oh no, we've lost John.
I have the poem if I need to fill in.
Go for it, Caylin.
Let me pull it up. John, where have you gone? Oh no, I wasn't expecting to do the poetry reading tonight.
I think his connection's completely gone. He's gone back. So you
Okay, well, shall I read it?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
I don't have the story about a middle daughter or anything like that. But yeah, so here I go. My first poetry reading on Zoom. In this high place, it is as simple as this. Leave everything you know behind. Step toward the cold surface. Say the old prayer of rough love. and open both arms. Those who come with empty hands will stare into the lake astonished. There in the cold light, reflecting pure snow, the true shape of your own face. Oh, thank you, Melissa, for putting the words in the chat. So, do we end there, Nick, with that abrupt finish?
That was a lovely reading. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for sharing everything, and thank you everybody for coming along tonight, and hopefully a little bit of reflection this evening as you fall to sleep and think about what we've talked about.
Thanks everybody. Sorry,
yeah, thanks everyone. Feel free to reach out.